Welcome back to the History of. On today's episode, we're looking into the coquettification of Catholicism, how ancient symbols of sacrifice and holiness are being repackaged into trendy Instagram aesthetics. But is this style revival saving the faith or stripping it of its soul? Back in the Counter-Reformation, Catholic art literally saved belief. Elizabeth Lev shows how dramatic paintings and sculptures drew people back to truth. Today's fashionistas are doing the same, but without the theology. As Lynn Neal says, Christianity now walks the runway, but is it still preaching the cross? In Matthew 23:27, Jesus warns against looking holy on the outside while being empty inside. And in Exodus 28, God carefully designed priestly garments not for vanity, but for glory and beauty that pointed to Him. So, is this just a vibe or a veiled rebellion? In the 1500s, the Catholic Church found itself in crisis. The Protestant Reformation, led by figures like Martin Luther, had accused the Church of being too rich, too proud, and too focused on rituals rather than scripture. People were leaving the Church in droves. But instead of retreating or becoming plain, the Church chose something bold. It used art to fight back. This time in history is called the Counter-Reformation, and it sparked a wave of dramatic, emotional, and beautiful religious art. The Church turned to artists like Caravaggio, who painted saints not as distant, glowing figures, but as raw and real people, sometimes bloody, sometimes weeping, and always striking. One famous piece, The Death of the Virgin, shocked people because Mary looked truly dead, pale and lifeless, like a real woman, not a holy statue. But that was the point, to pull people into the story, not push them away. Another artist, Bernini, sculpted the ecstasy of Saint Teresa, showing the saint in a moment of intense, almost sensual, spiritual experience. Her face and body made people feel something they couldn't explain. This was the beginning of what some now call holy coquetry, using beauty to attract hearts back to faith. These images didn't just show God's power, they showed emotion, beauty, and desire wrapped in holiness. The Church understood that people often connect with beauty before they understand truth. As Psalm 27:4 says, "One thing I ask from the Lord, to gaze on the beauty of the Lord and to seek Him in His temple." Beauty wasn't just decoration, it was a doorway to belief. What's ironic is that Protestants accused the Church of idol worship for making such art, but the Church doubled down. It believed that sacred beauty was part of God's nature. After all, in Exodus 31:1-5, God tells Moses to choose artists to build and decorate the tabernacle. God even says He gave them the spirit of craftsmanship to make gold, silver, and beautiful fabrics. Art, in this sense, was holy warfare, a way to fight falsehood with wonder. In the end, these seductive yet spiritual images helped keep millions in the Catholic fold. It worked especially well in places like Italy and Spain. The Church didn't run from its critics. It dressed in gold, painted its saints with tears, and said, "Look at the beauty, come and see." And people did. Let's go back even earlier, to the early Church. At first, Christian leaders wore simple robes like everyone else. But over time, especially as Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire, the clothes started to change. Bishops began to dress like royalty. And by the Middle Ages, priests were wearing layers of flowing robes made from silk, velvet, and gold thread. Each piece had a name: the alb, the chasuble, the stole. These weren't just clothes, they were symbols of power and mystery. The church taught that these garments were patterned after heaven itself. Revelation 7-9 describes the saints in heaven as wearing white robes, holding palm branches. So, priests too wore white albs to represent purity. The stole, worn around the neck, symbolized the yoke of Christ, as mentioned in Matthew 11:29. Take my yoke upon you, for my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. But the fashion became more than symbolic. It became breathtaking. Embroidery of angels, gold lace, gems stitched into collars. Some vestments looked more like red carpet gowns. Here's what most people don't know. Many of these vestments were handmade by nuns who saw it as a holy calling. In medieval convents, women would spend months designing and sewing these garments. One lesser-known example is St. Clare of Assisi, who not only led a spiritual movement, but also designed sacred altar cloths and vestments. Catholic fashion wasn't just for priests, it was powered by women's creativity. The clothes weren't just for mass, they made the entire church feel like a stage, where every detail pointed to God. Over time, these styles influenced royal fashion in Europe. Kings and queens started copying ecclesiastical style for their coronations. This is one reason why Catholic aesthetics still feel royal, even today. Even in our modern fashion world, long flowing garments, gold embroidery, and bishop-like capes still echo these ancient designs. So when people today post TikToks about Catholic fashion, they're actually tapping into a 1,000-year-old tradition of dressing like divinity. It's not just cosplay, it's cultural memory. Dressing like a priest or a nun with the right fabrics and symbols is a way to borrow from heaven, and people, whether they believe or not, feel it. No figure in Catholicism has been more loved, painted, and romanticized than Mary, the mother of Jesus. But how did she go from being a humble Jewish girl in Nazareth to a global fashion and beauty icon? It started with how artists portrayed her. During the Renaissance, painters began to idealize Mary with smooth skin, graceful hands, and soft expressions. Her clothes were usually blue, symbolizing both heaven and royalty. But blue was also the most expensive paint color in the world. So, when artists painted her in blue, they were making a luxury statement. These images were everywhere: altars, homes, prayer cards. Over time, Mary became more than just the mother of Jesus. She became a symbol of perfect femininity. Women copied how she looked. Girls were named after her. In Luke 1:28, the angel greets her by saying, "Hail, full of grace, the Lord is with thee." That phrase alone shaped generations of Marian devotion. And in John 2:1-11, when Mary tells Jesus to perform his first miracle at the wedding, it showed her influence and authority. But here's the twist. As Mary's image spread, it also became more emotional and sometimes even sensual. In 17th century Spain, for example, statues of Mary were dressed in real lace, jewels, and even perfumes. Her eyes were made of glass to appear lifelike. Some believers saw her as their most beautiful queen, and others as their most tender mother. This duality, modest yet beautiful, distant yet close, turned her into a cultural force. By the 20th century, fashion designers started referencing Mary in runway shows and photo shoots. The halo, the veil, the folded hands, it all became part of a new language of style. Madonna, the pop star, famously used Marian imagery in her concerts. Some called it blasphemy. Others said she was just being honest. Mary had always been part holy and part human, part spiritual and part stylish. Today, Mary appears on t-shirts, jewelry, Instagram filters, and even nail art. For some, it's still devotion. For others, it's aesthetic. But either way, the coquettification of Mary is complete. She's not just in churches, she's in fashion weeks, mood boards, and music videos. And she still turns heads. In the late 20th century, something unexpected happened. The world of high fashion discovered the drama and beauty of Catholicism. Designers who weren't even religious began using Catholic symbols on the runway. Crosses, veils, halos, and even priest-like robes appeared in fashion shows in Paris, Milan, and New York. David Inglis calls this moment Catwalk Catholicism, when designers treated the Catholic Church like a giant, dramatic fashion house. In 1993, Jean-Paul Gaultier shocked audiences with models dressed like punk rock nuns. In the 2000s, Dolce & Gabbana began using images of the Virgin Mary, rosaries, and black lace mantillas in their collections. But this wasn't just random style, it was pulling from centuries of Catholic visuals. Fashion was embracing the drama, mystery, and sensuality that the Church had long cultivated. The Church had once used beauty to evangelize. Now, fashion was using it to sell luxury. What makes this even more interesting is how many of the designers behind this trend were openly gay, like Gaultier and Riccardo Tisci. They had grown up around Catholic imagery and found it both oppressive and inspiring. The irony was thick. A church that once condemned them now became their greatest aesthetic influence. The bold mix of sacred and sensual created tension. Some called it art, others called it blasphemy. Yet, it kept people watching. As Matthew 23:27 says, "You are like whitewashed tombs, which look beautiful on the outside, but on the inside are full of bones." That verse suddenly felt like fashion critique. Many people don't realize that even the Met Gala, America's most famous fashion event, hosted a 2018 theme called Heavenly Bodies, Fashion and the Catholic Imagination. Celebrities walked the red carpet in angel wings, papal hats, and jewel-covered robes. Rihanna dressed as the Pope. The event was a massive hit, but also stirred controversy. Was it admiration, mockery, or something deeper? At its core, Catwalk Catholicism reveals something powerful. Sacred style sells. The Church had once designed clothes to lead people to God. Now, those same designs were being used to sell perfume, magazines, and celebrity brands. Whether holy or heretical, the line between faith and fashion had officially blurred, and it looked fabulous. Fast forward to today, and Catholic style has exploded across the internet. From TikTok to Instagram, young people are dressing like nuns, wearing rosaries as necklaces, and curating what some now call the Christian girl aesthetic. It's soft, feminine, mysterious, and heavily influenced by Catholic imagery. Lynn Neal describes this trend in her book Religion in Vogue, where religious symbols are being used not for worship, but for self-expression. For example, some influencers wear veils in selfies, mimicking old Marian paintings. Others pose with candles, icons, or in front of church doors, not to pray, but to capture a vibe. Some even call themselves St. Cole girls, dressing in long, modest skirts, soft lighting, and pale blues like modern-day Madonnas. As Proverbs 31-25 says, "She is clothed with strength and dignity, and she laughs without fear of the future." That verse is now used in captions next to posts that look more like fashion magazines than devotionals. What's surprising is how many of these users aren't Catholic. They're not going to Mass, but they're embracing the style of Catholicism. To them, it's not religion, it's a mood. They're drawn to the beauty, the stillness, the romance of it all. In a loud, chaotic world, Catholic aesthetics feel peaceful and powerful. But this also raises questions. Can you separate the look from the faith? Is wearing a crucifix without believing in Jesus respectful or hollow? In Revelation 3:1, Jesus says to the church in Sardis, "You have a reputation for being alive, but you are dead." That verse strikes a nerve today. Is modern aesthetic Catholicism alive with faith or just dressed up? Some argue that this trend could actually lead people back to God, that beauty can still be a path to belief. Others fear it turns sacred symbols into Instagram props. Still, the coquettification of Catholicism has reached new heights. It's not just in cathedrals, it's in makeup tutorials, Pinterest boards, and seasonal Lent diets promoted as wellness. Whether you see it as blasphemy or brilliance, one thing is clear: Catholic beauty has never stopped captivating the world. It just changed platforms from stained glass to smartphone screens.